Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the former Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and the Executive Director of the America First Policy Institute, the Honorable Chad Wolf.
All right. How's everyone doing this morning? Good? All right. Well, thanks for being here early on a Monday. And good morning. Welcome to AFPI's Back the Blue Honoring Our Heroes discussion. And again, thank you for the Capitol Hill Club for hosting this event. I am Chad Wolf, the Executive Director of AFPI, Chairman for the Center of Homeland Security and Immigration, and I previously served as Acting Secretary for Homeland Security during the Trump administration. We are here this morning as Police Week draws to a close to honor our law enforcement officers and to discuss the rising crime and lawlessness plaguing our nation's biggest cities. We honor those lost in the line of duty, not just for how they died, but also for how they lived. The men and women who comprise the thin blue line between order and chaos represent the very backbone of the rule of law in our country. Without their dedication, without their sacrifice, the institutions of our democracy would lose their defenders. 3 years ago, civil unrest and the defund the police movement took center stage in many cities across our nation, including right here in Washington, D.C. During that year, the murder rate increased nationwide by 30%, the largest single-year increase ever reported in U.S. history. Unfortunately, today, violent crime has also become the new normal for many cities across the country and has seemingly plateaued from 2020 and 2021 historic highs. Last year, homicides in major cities remained 43% higher than just in 2019. And as shocking as all that might be to some, it's not a surprise to all, especially to our men and women in blue. The anti-police rhetoric and increased public scrutiny by local leaders and activists have demoralized our law enforcement professionals and made it virtually impossible for them to do their job. This was particularly evident in 2020, and I know all too well the challenges law enforcement faced that year. As Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, the nation's largest law enforcement agency, I had the responsibility of safeguarding Americans against all threats, foreign and domestic, which included protecting federal properties. Amid a mostly peaceful protest in 2020, I deployed DHS law enforcement officers to protect federal facilities, monuments, and other critical infrastructure around the country when local leaders failed to do so, something that, to my knowledge, had not been done before that time. Unfortunately, during this time, DHS lost a law enforcement officer to the violence in 2020. Officer Pat Underwood was protecting a courthouse in Oakland, California, when he was shot and killed in the line of duty. Pat gave his life protecting us, as does every man and woman who puts on the badge. I'll never forget attending Pat's funeral and visiting with his family and loved ones. DHS law enforcement officers were put in harm's way later in that year in Portland, Oregon. The city of Portland had been under siege for nearly 50 days straight by a violent mob, and each night lawless anarchists destroyed and desecrated property. I personally visited Portland and toured the damage and vandalism, including to the federal courthouse. Over the course of 3 months, hundreds of DHS law enforcement officers sustained injuries, while the news media and certain members of Congress unfairly maligned them and referred to them as the Gestapo or stormtroopers. What happened in Portland, the violence against law enforcement in communities elsewhere that befell the nation in 2020 underscores just how dangerous and unpredictable a career in law enforcement can be. These moments of particular violence remind us exactly why we celebrate the fallen heroes during Police Week. The deadliest day in law enforcement history was on September the 11th, 2001, when 72 officers were killed in the line of duty. 20 years later saw the deadliest year in law enforcement history, when 586 officers were killed or died in the line of duty, with COVID-19 adding to the litany of dangers officers had to face while protecting our communities. No matter the day, no matter the year, far too many officers are taking from us by violence, leaving behind grieving families and communities in their wake. By laying down their lives daily to ensure our communities are safe and secure, and by serving chaos's first responders, our law enforcement professionals really are our everyday heroes, and we should honor them as such. As Matthew 5:9 states, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." For all of those that have given their lives wearing the badge and to honor their end of watch, would you please join me in a moment of silence to honor their sacrifice? Thank you. Aside from putting their lives on the line, today our law enforcement officers are also being subverted from actually enforcing the law. Rogue prosecutors are pursuing cases for political purposes and releasing violent criminals on no cash bail. This lack of accountability is only incentivizing more crime and discouraging our officers from making stops and arrests. That's why we're here today, not only to honor our men and women in uniform, but also to address the many challenges they face and to explore those America First solutions to fixing America's crime crisis and restoring law and order. We've got a great panel for you. Let me introduce now the moderator, AFPI's Director for the Center for Law and Justice, a former uniformed police officer in San Jose, California for nearly 20 years, and he was my former Deputy Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security, Scott Erickson. Scott will be moderating the panel as well as introducing the panel, so help me welcoming to the stage Scott Erickson.
Thank you, Chad, for the thoughtful introduction, and thank you to everyone here today and for those who are joining us online. Police Week is a solemn time for the law enforcement community. It is a time to reflect upon the very real sacrifices that far too many of our nation's police officers make each and every day. And in particular, we pay tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice by giving their lives in service to their communities. Last year, 246 federal, state, tribal, and local law enforcement officers died in the line of duty. 60 of those officers were shot, 12 in ambush-style attacks. We come here today not only to honor their loss, but also to discuss how we as a society can uplift and empower those who continue to carry on the thin blue line. Joining us today are four esteemed panelists. Pam Bondi serves as the 37th Attorney General for the state of Florida. A lifelong Floridian, General Bondi entered that office after having spent 18 years as a prosecutor, trying all manner of cases from domestic violence to capital murder. During her first legislative session as Attorney General, she aggressively championed reforms to eliminate unscrupulous doctors and clinics operating in Florida, a state that at the time was known as the pill mill capital of America. Her service has not been contained to Florida alone, however. She also served on President Trump's Opioid and Drug Abuse Commission, where she worked alongside other national leaders in areas of drug prevention, interdiction, and treatment. She earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Florida and her JD from Stetson University. She also serves as co-chair of AFPI's Center for Law and Justice and as chair of AFPI's Constitutional Litigation Partnership. Please welcome General Pam Bondi. Matt Whitaker served as the acting United States Attorney General from 2018 through 2019. Prior to that, General Whitaker served as the Chief of Staff at the DOJ, and earlier in his career was appointed as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, a position he held between 2004 and 2009. He earned a trifecta of degrees from the University of Iowa, his MBA, JD, and bachelor's degree, while also earning the Big Ten Medal of Honor as a 3-year letterman tight end on the Iowa Hawkeyes football team. He currently serves alongside General Bondi as co-chair of AFPI's Center for Law and Justice. Please welcome General Matt Whitaker. Mark Lamb has served for over 6 years as the sheriff of Pinal County, Arizona, the third largest sheriff's office, with a staff of over 600 people. Sheriff Lamb oversees a budget of nearly $55 million in a department offering public safety services, including the staffing of detention facilities, criminal investigations, and patrol services. Prior to being elected sheriff, he served for a number of years as a police officer in the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community before joining the Pinal County Sheriff's Office. Please welcome Sheriff Mark Lamb. Nicole Parker served for 12 years as a special agent in the FBI, where she was involved in investigations related to financial crimes, sexual assaults, and among other things, the horrific shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida in 2018. Prior to beginning her career in law enforcement, she worked in finance in New York City, where the tragic events of 9/11 inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement. Since leaving the FBI, she has been vocal about the need to pursue structural reforms within the agency and recently testified on the topic at Congress. Please welcome Nicole Parker. So thank you again, everybody, for coming today, and thank you to all four panelists for joining us today for this important discussion. I provided a brief introduction, but if you wouldn't mind, maybe take a minute, starting with you, Nicole, to discuss a little bit about what Police Week means to you in particular.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's my honor and privilege to be with y'all today. I left the FBI just a few months ago, and prior to my departure, February 2nd of 2021, my closest friend in the FBI, Special Agent Laura Schwarzenberger and Special Agent Daniel Alphen, were shot and killed in the line of duty while executing a search warrant to stop a child predator. He was a child pornographer, and so this is very near and dear to my heart. She was my very closest friend in the FBI, and I can tell you for certain that they died with honor and that they died protecting this country. And I know that right now the FBI is, not really popular with many people, which I understand, but they were doing the real work. They were doing the heavy lifting, and they were protecting children. And so to me, this week is very, very important and sacred to me, and I would just like to personally thank them for their sacrifice.
As a law enforcement officer, as I was driving over here this morning in the Uber, just to see all the men and women in uniform and with their badges on, it just gave me such pride. These are men and women that put this on every day. They go out and they serve their communities. Unfortunately, we lose far too many in this country. Men and women who just wanted to protect their communities, serve their families, and end up losing their lives. And so this week is very special because it's an opportunity to honor those men and women who laid down their lives, who paid the ultimate sacrifice. Unfortunately, all of us in this profession know people personally that have lost their lives, and it's this week that we take to honor them. And it's such a source of pride to see all the men and women walking up to the Capitol, and I think it represents just how great America is. So it truly is a pleasure to be here this week.
Yeah, I echo those remarks by both of these members of the law enforcement community, and I've always just been impacted by this week because it's a solemn week, and it's one of the few chances we have to celebrate those that give the ultimate sacrifice in protection of our communities. And it's a noble profession, and we need to honor and thank the men and women of law enforcement whenever we have a chance. And so this is one of those chances. I think all of you probably do it more often than many. The patriots in this room understand how important law enforcement is, from the sheriff's deputies and the police officers in our local communities all the way up to federal law enforcement. But it's just a chance to appreciate what we have as a country and the types of people that raise their hand and volunteer to serve their communities. And one final thought is that let's make sure that I think Pam and I wanted to do something this week for this through our affiliation with AFPI, and I think this is going to be a great tradition that we're going to continue on really into the far future.
Thanks, Matt. And we all know firsthand, I was a prosecutor for 18 years before I was Attorney General, and there's no ordinary day in the life of a police officer. There's no ordinary day. And I say the same thing for their spouses and their kids and their parents, because you have no idea what's going to happen when you get up and go to work every morning as a law enforcement officer, especially in the country in which we now live. It's so frightening. So we have got to be here to support them and to back them in everything they do and to fund the police.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all very much for those comments. Sheriff Lamb, I wanted to start with you. You've been the sheriff now for 6 years, and you've been in law enforcement for a couple decades. What are some of the things that you've seen in your career and that you see and that your deputies talk to you about that you don't think is fully understood here in Washington, D.C. or goes overlooked here in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's not that it's not understood here at Washington, D.C. I would say it's ignored here in Washington, D.C. If they can track every $600 payment on Venmo, they certainly know what's going on as far as it relates to crime across this country. For them to plead ignorance would be disingenuine and untruthful. And for us, I think one of the biggest things we're facing right now in this country, and we know where it comes from, is the fentanyl scourge and the dangerous drugs that are coming in and flowing into this country. They estimate that 50% of all illegal drugs in America come through Arizona's borders right now. A lot of those make their way through my community. And to see that the government hardly talks about this issue is very concerning. We don't want the federal government to intervene necessarily. We can handle this as a state, but we certainly would love for them to recognize it and provide some support to local law enforcement, especially as it relates to funding to address these issues. So I would say that more so the things not going unnoticed, they're being ignored. And then they're focusing their efforts on things that are not problems for us. While we all agree that school shootings and a lot of different things are definitely, we want to avoid those in our communities, I also think they're erroneously attributing a lot of crime to gun crime when really what we're struggling with is a mental health and a drug addiction problem in this country. And that is what we should be addressing. And they want to ignore that inconvenient fact. And so I think that over the last 20 years and over the last 6 years as a sheriff, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is that increase in mental health issues in our community, the increase in drug addiction issues in our community, and the government's lack of response to address those things appropriately or to support the state and local officials in their efforts to combat these things.
Yeah, all very good points. And you mentioned two things that I want to kind of piggyback off of that on. You mentioned fentanyl, you mentioned school shootings, and sort of talking about the evolution of policing over the past 40 years. And I think a lot of folks don't really understand that the job of a police officer today is far different than it was 40, 50 years ago. There are seminal events such as the Columbine shooting, 9/11, and now we talk about fentanyl that really changed the scope and structure of what the average cop has to do on a daily basis. To you, Sheriff Lamb, how have you navigated that? And to all of you to answer, how have you seen that change manifest, and what do you think the public needs to understand about policing in the 21st century?
I think they should understand how dangerous it is. Pam kind of touched on it. The average police officer will experience anywhere between 400 and 700 traumatic events in their career. The average citizen experiences 2 to 3. And so just to give you how different our world is compared to the average citizen and what we're dealing with. And now you add in things like fentanyl, where we're actually having to go and try to stop this dangerous drug from getting into our communities. All of our guys are using Narcan on a daily basis. We carry the Narcan for us, for our dogs, but we're using it on a daily basis to save lives in our communities. That's how bad this has gotten. And now you're seeing the introduction of things like xylazine. The cartels are introducing xylazine, which is a non-opioid, which is impervious to naloxone or Narcan, which are counteractives when we do encounter somebody that's overdosing on or being poisoned by fentanyl. And now we're seeing things like gray death, which is a combination of fentanyl, heroin, and carfentanil, which is 100 times more powerful than fentanyl. If you don't think that my deputies don't get up every morning and concern themselves with who they might interact with today that might have some of this on them that would adversely affect one of my deputies. But they go out and they do it every day, and I think it's a tribute, like I said earlier, to the men and women that do this job. Despite the dangers, despite the traumatic events, despite what it takes from us that never gives back, it takes from our families, but we do it because we love it and we owe it to our communities. And so I think just knowing that these people are going out and putting themselves on the line to protect all of us every day is really a tribute to who they are.
Yeah, Scott, I would just add, everything to the sheriff, but one of the things that struck me after being a U.S. attorney and then coming back in the Trump administration at Main Justice was just how quickly these cases turn international and how how powerful the cartels have become, how deep and inculcated into our country they are in their organizational structure. And it's amazing how international these cases. It's something, obviously, a porous southern border has not helped. It has allowed them to, I think, get even more people and resources into our country, not just along the border, but deep into, places like my home state of Iowa. And so I think that's what struck me in the evolution of at least doing federal law enforcement.
If I could just add, where I say that it's going ignored is, take, for example, the State of the Union address. The leading cause of death in America right now is fentanyl poisonings for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. In Arizona in 2021, we had 44 children die from fentanyl poisonings. 7 were under the age of 1. These are statistics that cannot be ignored as Americans, yet in the State of the Union, I think it was broached. It just, one broaching of this threat to America, which has become the greatest threat to America, which is coming from our southern border. That is to my point, that is how it's being ignored as opposed to going unnoticed.
Yeah, all very good points, and Matt, you bring up. I think it's important people understand or think of law enforcement or crime as a local issue, but as Matt pointed out, it's a global issue, and it requires a whole of government approach to really deal with some of these acute problems that communities are facing. Pam, I wanted to ask you a question about everyone's favorite topic, rogue progressive prosecutors. We've done a lot of work at AFPI on progressive prosecutors, and I know during your tenure as Florida Attorney General, you had to deal with some of the fallout from that, folks who are abusing discretion. We all agree that discretion's elemental to the criminal justice system, but when you abuse it and make categorical decisions on who you're going to charge or what you're going to charge or not charge, it has a pretty significant impact on public safety, and I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, and our great law enforcement officers do their jobs every day, and then you have a rogue prosecutor who's dropping their cases, and it's becoming a revolving door. They're letting these violent criminals back out on the streets. They're dropping cases. When I was Attorney General, the state attorney in Orlando, her name was Aramis Ayala, she said, I categorically will never seek the death penalty. Like, okay, well, that's your job, at least to weigh it and consider it. So went to Governor Scott, and she was removed from every death penalty case, and my statewide prosecutors took them on. And we started that when she refused to even consider the death penalty on the murder of an Orlando police officer. And so that was truly unbelievable to me. Then in my hometown of Hillsborough County, we had a rogue prosecutor named Andrew Warren, who is now no longer a state attorney, thanks to our governor. And we have a great state attorney, Susie Lopez, who was appointed. But he was letting my murderers, back when I was a prosecutor, out of prison without notifying the victims' families, without notifying the attorneys on the case, without notifying law enforcement. So we've got to, we've always said support your local elected officials. Now more than ever, I think people are seeing how important that is, because our great law enforcement officers, again, can do their jobs, risk their lives every day. But unless the prosecutors, who are the quarterbacks, are going to back them up, our streets aren't going to be safe. So that's so important. And that's why I'm so proud of the work at AFPI, doubling down and exposing all these rogue prosecutors throughout the country. They're everywhere. We had 2 in Florida.
No, you're right. I think there's 75 plus at least strewn throughout the U.S. I mean, it's become a significant phenomenon affecting public safety. But Nicole, any comments to piggyback off on that with respect to how does it impact the morale of officers, whether they're at the federal, state, or local level?
Right, so on the federal level, obviously we're working with the United States Attorney's Office, and as an FBI agent or any federal officer, you are conducting your investigations, you're gathering evidence, you're doing everything that you can to work a case, and then you take it to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the prosecutorial decision is really up to them. So if they say, you know what, we're not going to prosecute that, then you're like, okay, I just all of this work for nothing, but why are you not going to prosecute that? And I think a lot of the people at the FBI in particular, based on my experience, are concerned that they're picking investigations, they're cherry picking what kind of cases to work. And so the action or inaction of investigating certain cases is very much politicized, is what a lot of people are realizing. And you know what, Lady Justice must be blind, and we must be prosecuting cases based on the facts and based on the evidence, and you can't be more aggressive because it fits your political agenda or be less aggressive because it does not fit your political agenda. It should have nothing to do with politics. And I can tell you at the FBI in particular, many of us feel that there's almost like there's two FBIs, right? You've got the FBI people that just signed up. I was there 9/11. I just wanted to protect my country, serve, stop criminals. Then there seems to be kind of more of a political FBI. We call it more like the FBI 2, people that are, making decisions based on their political decisions, and it's really kind of inhibiting those who just came to do the real work from getting their jobs done because they've politicized it. But really, ultimately, the frustration is, on all levels, local, state, federal. As an agent and investigator, you're gathering the evidence, you're presenting it to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and really the decision is up to them whether or not they want to charge that crime.
Yeah, good point. Sheriff Lamb, sorry, go ahead.
Can I add one thing to that? Because I think it needs to be said, and it really supports what these fine women have said. But it is that the left has determined that they can't change some of these laws. They can't change the death penalty. They can't change, certain other crimes because they could never get the American people to agree with them. They could never, get a legislative body to pass this. But they've decided with, I think, Barack Obama famously did it in two instances. One, his phone and pen remarks, and I think also his, DACA and other policies where he determined that they could categorically, with using prosecutorial discretion, not do a certain category of cases. And so that has been picked up, and like you said, 75 of these prosecutors around our country are determining categorically not just whether to seek the death penalty or not, and this is an argument that I had for my time at the Department of Justice as well. But there are other crimes that are just categorically being not pursued. And I think, one of the things that administrations, especially on the right, when they come in, is gun crimes typically are an area of emphasis because many times, for some reason, these local district attorney's offices don't want to prosecute the illegal possession of a firearm, oftentimes by people that are either drug users or felons or otherwise prohibited persons. And so, I think that prosecutorial discretion is being abused by many on the left in order to accomplish their policy goals, and that was never the intention of the way our system's set up.
What we've allowed is that we've strayed so far from the Constitution that we've allowed bureaucrats to make decisions that elected officials should be making. And now we're seeing that on a national level, and that starts to trickle down to a local level where these prosecutors feel emboldened to now make bureaucratic decisions that they should not be making. And that starts here. We've allowed it for far too long, which I think has been one of the issues with the FBI and other places, where we've now allowed government bureaucrats, non-elected, to start making decisions. And ATF is a perfect example. They continue to make decisions outside of what Congress has allocated, and now they're determining that what was once legal, that people bought legally, were now becoming illegally. And that all starts with bureaucracy, prosecutors saying, we know better than what the Constitution says, or we know better than what our elected officials say, and they start making their own decisions as it relates to how the law should be applied, how it should be enforced, how it should be prosecuted. And so I would say if we get back to the Constitution and let those decisions be made by the elected officials and stop empowering bureaucrats to do that. Are there any bureaucrats in here?
No, I mean, there's a significant separation of powers issues here. We talk about 75 prosecutors around the country or more, but whenever you talk about this issue, it seems very common sense that it doesn't make sense. How are they getting elected, and what can you do as leaders within your communities, in the public space to obviously help educate the people, but what else can we do to make sure people understand the gravity of the decisions they're making when they elect folks who are going to pursue these criminal first, victim last policies?
Are you looking to me for that?
Well,
Yeah, that's so true. And if you look at statistics, like these woke cities, you've got, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco. Remember when they said, we want to send social workers into domestic calls? Do you remember that? Okay. What is the most dangerous, Nicole and I were having this talk, what is the most dangerous situation for a law enforcement officer? A domestic. That's the most dangerous situation, right? And serving warrants, of course, but domestics. And they're so anti-law enforcement that let's send a social worker. First of all, that's so dangerous, right, Scott, for the social workers. But defunding our police was the most ridiculous thing they could ever do, instead of increasing our police and increasing. I'm a big believer in community policing, because that's how you get to know your neighborhoods, you get to know your citizens, and they trust you, like sheriff, like with all of your county. And he's so close to the border. I mean, it's so frightening where you are right now to protect all of your deputies. But we have to fund our police, and we have to support them. And I think that's crucial now to anything and everything that we do. I think we have to double down on supporting them. But I mean, we can get into retention now with the world in which we live. It's, you know, so dangerous for people to apply to become a deputy or a police officer. And if they're not supported by, frankly, our city police, I'm just talking state, our city police are appointed by the mayors, our police chiefs. So if you've got a woke mayor, they're not going to support their and you know, most police officers and sheriffs they're law enforcement. They don't care what political party they are. They're there to serve and protect. 99, wouldn't you say, % are there to serve and protect. But if they're not supported by a mayor, how are we gonna protect them?
Could I add one thing to that? Because I mean, Pam makes such a great point about how the law enforcement needs to be accountable to the people through their electeds. And what I saw, for my time at Maine Justice, is places like Chicago would beg for consent decrees. Why? Because it puts a judge in charge of the police force instead of the elected officials. And so the judges can set the budgets, the judges can set the policies and procedures, and so the mayor and the city council can just throw up their hands and say, oh, I'm sorry, we have a consent decree with the federal government, and it perverts the accountability for the citizens to look to anybody to sort of address any issues they're having with policing.
Yeah, and that's how it's always been in the past. Is we've done this with capitalism too. Business used to keep government in check. And now business is intertwined with government, and we're seeing the effects of that in our communities. It's no different, that the communities used to hold those police chiefs and those sheriffs accountable, whether it's through an election or whatever it would be, and that is how we did our job. I still do it that way. I'm very out there on social media. I try to lead. I try to put it out there that we're doing a good job. I treat our taxpayers as if they were investors in a company. I want to show them what we're doing, and because of that, we have a great interaction with our community. We have seen the detachment across America. The cities that have struggled the most really had to have separated. They did not have a line of communication between the communities and their citizens and the law enforcement, and it played out terribly over the last few years. And so I think we've got to do a much better job as law enforcement, but that starts by not having these federal monitors coming in there. They can't even do their own job, and now they're going in and monitoring local law enforcement to tell them how to do it. We see it in Maricopa County has had federal monitors. They pay about $20 million a year for that, and it kills morale. It destroys the agency, and in the end, you don't have any better police force than you would have if you'd have just allowed them to do their job. I went all over the place on that, so I'm sorry.
No, it's good. But Pam, you mentioned something a moment ago about recruiting and retention. We talked about the litany of phenomena that are creating this anti-police atmosphere that's inhibiting people from getting into the profession. I think we're dealing with a generational crisis in recruiting and retention today. How does it affect? How do you think that affects not just the law enforcement profession long term, but public safety from each of your own perspectives?
Well, certainly public safety, recruiting and retention are, that's the core. You don't get anywhere without that for a law enforcement officer. And if you don't have the people above you supporting you, if you don't have the citizens supporting you, then how are we ever going to recruit and retain great law enforcement? It goes the same with prosecutors. How are you going to recruit and retain? You don't get paid anything, if you're a prosecutor, if you're a cop. You're doing it because you're there to serve and protect. And if the citizens of our country don't have their backs, then why are they doing it? And that's, again, I think why community policing is so important, because citizens have to know. You're not there to arrest citizens, you're there to protect citizens, to serve and protect. And that's why I think the great work we're doing here is so important, highlighting, and this is a tragic week. We've all had so many friends killed, all of us, in the line of duty. But it's so important to highlight all the good that police officers do in this world. And they're the ones that, it sounds basic, but they run to danger, not away from it. And they're protecting us every day.
Absolutely.
It's about leadership. If you get a good leader in there, people want to come work for them. We got into this so we could shoot guns and drive cars fast and do all those things. And now they've taken that away. And the reason we have no issues recruiting in our agency is because we do real police work. We hold you accountable if you break the law. We will find you. And we do our job as protecting our communities. And because of that, we have people from all across the country that want to come and work for our sheriff's office. Conversely, what they'll do a lot of times is put a yes man in place as a chief or somewhere in a community, and then you expect that people want to come work for them. Look at what they did to those guys in Border Patrol on the horses. They said they were whipping people. Then when it came out that they weren't, they quietly acknowledged that they weren't doing that. And I will tell you firsthand, it destroyed morale in the Border Patrol. If you don't have leaders that are willing to stand up for their people, back the blue, you guys have it written out here, do not give in to this defund. You got to stand up and say, we need to fund the police. That is how we fix this in this country. Honestly, men and women with the backbone to say, we're not doing this. It's not okay. It's not our job. We're going to continue to do police work because we owe it to the communities, because that's the way this country was founded, and that's what the rule of law means, and that's why if we lose this, we lose our country. If we lose the rule of law, we lose our country.
Absolutely. Nicole, I think you said 9/11 inspired you to pursue a career in law enforcement. We've talked about how rhetoric matters and how supporting the police matters, but also how rhetoric on the opposite end can really have a debilitating effect on the profession. What would you tell somebody, what would any of you tell somebody thinking about a career in law enforcement today?
Well, first of all, the honest, blunt side of me would say, make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, because in this environment, it is probably not what it was 25 years ago. So we need honest men and women who are going to work hard, who are not going to live in fear, who are going to stand up for right, who are going to have integrity, who are going to protect the community. They need to be going into law enforcement, and I strongly recommend it. As difficult as the environment is right now, if everyone that is a good-souled person that has integrity walks away, then we're in big trouble. And so I actually do continue to encourage young individuals to go into law enforcement. I can tell you that based on my experience, I worked on Wall Street. I was there the morning of September 11th in the World Financial Center. I watched the entire thing transpire before my face when those planes were flying into the World Trade Center. It was horrifying. I watched people jumping to their deaths. Our country is worth it. It matters. Our freedom matters. There are people that are trying to hurt us on the outside and on the inside, and we need brave men and women to step up to the line. There was a part of me that when I left the FBI, I thought, am I betraying my friend who was just killed in the line of duty? I mean, she just paid the ultimate sacrifice, and here I am walking away from this career that she died for. And I spoke to her husband, and we had an honest and candid conversation, and he said, you know what, Nicole? You have to do what you know is right and what you think is going to be best for this country. How can you best serve this country at this point? Laura is your angel, and she is going to back you up, and she is watching over you from heaven. When I made the decision to leave the FBI, it was not an easy decision. And if all the good people just leave the FBI, our country is in trouble. I can reassure you, there are so many amazing men and women who are standing up for what is right there. And we work with our local, federal, state partners, task force officers. We are working our tails off. People don't understand how difficult it is to be in law enforcement. I actually met Pam the night of the Parkland school shooting. And I share this personal story because she asked me to conduct death notifications that night. That is how I met Pam. So, the job is real. What we see is real. The tragedy is real. Officers are seeing the worst of humanity, but they do it because they love this country. They love their communities, and it comes with a sacrifice. You don't forget what you saw the night of that Parkland shooting. You never forget that. That is seared in your mind forever. People that are running towards gunfire, you don't forget that. The family members that have lost their loved ones. My friend Laura, her 2 sons, they don't have a mom anymore, but they do it because they love this country. So what I say is, I do recommend law enforcement for the fine, brave men and women in this country, but I do say, know where you're going. Know the jurisdiction you're working for. Do they back the blue? Do they fund police? Do they have strong leadership? Are they going to allow you to do your job? That really does matter. In all my time going from Wall Street, finance, and then into the FBI, I can stand and tell you that my most meaningful moments in my life were as a special agent for the FBI. There were experiences that I had that I knew I was impacting lives that I may never have the opportunity to do ever again. And that is fulfilling, and that is what matters. But I can tell you that there's a time and a place for everything, and I made a prayerful decision to step away, and I pray that I continue to serve this country with honor. But I do strongly recommend people to step up to the line and continue to work in law enforcement, but know who you're working for, and don't go in blindly. It's not what you see on TV. It is real. You are expected to run towards gunfire. It is dangerous. And they deserve our highest amount of support. And that's what I have to say.
And you know, when Matt and I speak places, we always say like the top, we always say how the FBI is weaponized now. But the line agents, the real deputies, the real sheriffs who are out there doing their job, they're still there. They're very much there, out protecting us. And I saw Nicole that night when so many children were murdered, and I was in a giant room with all their parents who hadn't been notified by our sheriff. And he's gone now, and hadn't been notified by the sheriff. And it was traumatic, it was horrible. They didn't know whether their children were dead or alive. We all knew that they all had the dead children, but they had to be notified. And that's when I asked Nicole, I said, this father is laying on the ground crying. Someone needs to tell him. I'm worried he's gonna have a heart attack, and he was a young man. I said, will you be the one to notify him? And I watched this angel go around this huge room and take these parents back and tell them that they would never see their children again. And what you did that night was truly remarkable. And those families all still remember Nicole. I still talk to a lot of those families every year. We just had the 5th anniversary of Parkland on Valentine's Day. These kids were all gunned down. But those are the real men and women of law enforcement that really you don't see. You're just seeing really the worst of the worst now on the news. But Matt, you've gotten to see the best of the best, too.
And I think that emphasizes a point that always strikes me, and I think Sheriff Lamb also mentioned this, but I just want to put a point on it. I think some people wonder, why do we do these events? Why are we spending a week celebrating the police and those that have, fallen in the line of duty? It's because the members of law enforcement, the men and women of law enforcement, see our individual citizens on their worst days. We get to see everyone on their best days. We get to celebrate all of the good things about the United States of America and humanity. Unfortunately, the men and women of law enforcement, when they sign up for these jobs, they're protecting their communities, but they're dealing with individuals that oftentimes it is absolutely the worst day of their life. And I just think that's why we celebrate the police. That's why we spend extra time emphasizing when they do good, and and we have weeks dedicated to their celebration.
All three. I mean, how do you add to all that? They've nailed it. And one thing that we are kind of our own worst enemy when it comes to recruiting. I do leadership trainings across this country, and when I go to these guys, the chiefs and the sheriffs, I'll say, how many of you, when asked if you want your child to be in this profession, how many of you say, oh, no. We can no longer complain about people wanting to do this job if we ourselves are telling people, no, I wouldn't want my child to do it. I had to shift my narrative, and I encourage any police officers, any leaders out there to shift your narrative. Yes, is this job a little bit more difficult right now? Yes. But we need warriors, men and women who are willing to go out and do this, who have a heart like Nicole has, who really, truly are passionate about this now. We need those men and women now more than ever. So when people ask me, I say yes. I would encourage my kids. They don't want to do it, probably because of the political side of it, but I actually do have a couple of my kids. One of my sons yesterday morning said, hey, Dad, I think I want to be a deputy. And I was like, yes, that's awesome. Unfortunately, nepotism keeps them from getting into it quite yet, but we've got to do a better job of ensuring that our narrative, our words, do not discourage people from doing this job, because if we're saying don't do it, trust me, it's going to have an effect. We've got to shift that narrative.
Did you tell him he doesn't necessarily get to wear a cowboy hat and be on TV all the time?
I don't want to discourage him yet. We'll break it to him slowly.
Look, you've all done a phenomenal job of explaining why police work matters and why being a cop matters. So thank you very much for that. I think we have time for some audience questions. So I think we have a microphone around here if anyone wants to. Just Chase here.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming. Tremendous panel. I want to thank you for coming such a long distance, but kind of warn everybody that woke neglect of our forces is all the way around woke Washington. And it's got me so upset, I'm running for the Board of Supervisors in Fairfax County, where they're using bureaucratic neglect instead of defund the police. We're short 200 police officers. We've had a 15% rise in crime, and it's being ignored. And I'm going to fight in two directions. My campaign slogan is Superman does not work for $65,000 a year. The second one, my question is, has anybody explored using a writ of mandamus to compel woke prosecutors to do their jobs?
Well, in Florida, I think, well, in some places they're appointed, correct? But most states, they're, yes, a couple states I feel like they may be appointed. But in most states, they're elected. They're independent constitutional officers. So that's why when you vote, get out and pay attention to the lower ballot candidates. School board, just like you said, supervisor of elections, all of the lower ballot races. But writ of mandamus, we in Florida removed Andrew Warren, a woke prosecutor, for a dereliction of duty. He wasn't following the law. He wasn't enforcing crime. We had sheriffs all standing up there with all of us, former prosecutors, former attorneys general, all signed on to that letter. But that was for dereliction of duty.
Go ahead, Sheriff. No, I just think the writ of mandamus is a very powerful tool, but it's a rifle shot. It's it's like when somebody's just not doing their job or categorically ignoring certain crimes or dismissing certain types of cases. It would end up, to some extent, there might be opportunities to use that. It's not going to be the proper tool in most cases. I love the old English writ system. I think there's some, the habeas, and I mean those traditions in the law are continue to be the foundation of our constitutional system. And I think the sheriff mentioned how we've moved so far away from the Constitution as the basis for our law enforcement, that there's no doubt that's how we find ourselves in this situation. Ultimately, the people need to take back their power. I think so often as I travel this country and I talk to people in many domains, it's just the bottom line is that we have become very comfortable in the whirlpool that is the swamp that is sort of American experience. We all, even the poorest among us have the benefits that kings centuries ago would have never had access to. I mean, the big screen TVs, the cell phones, just all the accoutrement of modern day living that has made us very comfortable. And unfortunately, human nature hasn't changed. We still have depravity. We still have violence. We still have all of the sins that that have passed through generations. And so I think the challenge is not necessarily that we use interesting tools to get people to do their jobs. We should get those people out of those jobs in the first place, because to your point, there's a reason that police is down 200 people in Fairfax County. There's a reason that the bureaucrats are just reducing the force and reducing the budget without actually going to the people. But that's where the people need to insert themselves and say, this is not what we want. We don't want property crime. We don't want graffiti. We don't want nuisance crimes. And I think the people need to again take back and get kind of get out of their comfort zone. I think to some extent we as a people have become very comfortable, and it's time, I think, to get comfortable in our discomfort and really, exert our power as the electorate to shape this community and shape the next century, and then even the next day, more in the way we want it instead of the way that woke bureaucrats want it.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more quick question.
I'm Janice Walt Grenadier.
Hold on a second. Somebody has a microphone.
Here you go, right here.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you very much. I'm Janice Volt Grenadier. I launched judicialpedia.com. Our Supreme Court Justice in Virginia had to step down because of it. Why are we not looking at the grand jury and allowing our citizens into it? We own the grand jury. It's the fourth arm of government, and it is the way that we can redress the public corruption and redress the things that our police officers, which we want to back, our judges are blocking. And the only way to redress a judge is through something like a grand jury, and we're being blocked. Do you have any suggestions on that?
You want me to start and let you take it? Yeah. You make a great point. However, traditionally, again, we live in a different world now, but previously, you want the secrecy of a grand jury to protect the integrity of good investigations. And that's why, as law enforcement officers, though, you have to have that to protect victims, to protect witnesses, to protect whistleblowers. However, we live in a different world now. And so, Matt, do you want to?
Yeah, and you've also, I think when James Madison wrote the Bill of Rights, I got that right, James Madison? No. Yeah, am I right on that? It feels right. I shouldn't doubt my American history, but obviously, it says what it says, right? And there was, then even preceding that, there was a tremendous amount of tradition and experience. And now, as we move to almost 250 years forward, what's written in the Constitution has been developed through court cases, through laws passed by Congress and signed by the president, that possibly sort of what was intended at the time has been perverted. And I think there needs to be a review of all of these things, because I don't think the grand jury functions any way like it was intended 250 years ago.
Can I add one thing to that? A lot of the problem is we have gotten away from the Constitution. You have judges legislating from the bench. You have executive branch passing rules and laws and mandates, and it's all messed up. And so you have these judges that are legislating from the bench, making decisions, and then prosecutors, in good faith, if they know that there is a prior ruling, it makes it very hard for them to take that case without potentially having a hit on their law license to a grand jury, knowing that case law has precluded that. And so we're running into a lot of problems where I have tried to take cases to the grand jury where they'll say, well, case law from this case or this case says we cannot move forward with that case. So we do have a lot of problems. I think we need to use the grand jury more to look at upturning or overturning some of those case law decisions. But
Well, when we look at the fact that $40 million was spent on a Russian hoax, and we, the people, it's the fourth arm of government, and even Scalia and Justice Powell stated that. And so we, the people, should have the right, and I'm not saying to misuse it, and it does need to stay private, but we should have the right to take indictments and ask for a grand jury to investigate. If they choose not to investigate, they choose not to investigate, and we can't really pursue it from that. But if our police officers, our FBI, are denying us an investigation into, let's just say, Biden administration and the corruption.
Yeah, and let me add to that, ma'am. A lot of times, prosecutors, I say you're elected, you're in office to make the tough calls, especially state prosecutors. That's why you're there, to make the tough decisions and make them transparent to the American people and your constituents. But they punt it. They send it to a grand jury to keep it secret, to say, oh, the grand jury made that decision, not me. Well, that's why you're elected, to make those decisions. And you got to vote them out of office.
It's a good line of questioning. Appreciate it. I think we've run out of time on our questioning. I'd like to welcome back Chad Wolf to the stage.
Not everybody clap at the same time.
Well, great. Pam, Matt, Sheriff Lamb, Nicole, and obviously Scott, thank you again for joining us today. It's such a kind of refreshing to have an honest conversation about the reality of today's landscape and policing. One more round of applause for the. So every month, AFPI has a speaker series. Obviously, we're focusing on Police Week, but we also tackle other issues such as energy, the economy, securing our borders, right to life, and others. So I welcome, and hopefully you all can make it back for another speaker series event. In the meantime, check out our website, americafirstpolicy.com. You can, or our socials for upcoming events, our policy products, and just overall our latest policy work. If you have the chance, several of us will be laying the wreath at the National Peace Officers Memorial here directly after this event. If you can visit at any point, not just this morning, but at any point, please do so. You can reflect upon the sacrifices of our police heroes. It's a special place. I've been there many times. I encourage you all to visit. So thank you again for being with us this morning. God bless you.